G'day guys! One of the biggest changes in the recent updates for the new Arcs of Omen season of competitive Warhammer 40k was that all Marines lost Armour of Contempt and many gained discounted or free war gear to offset this. So in today's video I want to discuss these changes, what they mean for Chaos Space Marines, what they mean for General Marines, what they mean for the meta as a whole, and some general advice on how you can approach these sorts of situations where you've had a big rules change and you need to be able to adapt your list on the fly and adapt your playstyle to match your new list. So with that being said, we're going to get into the video, but before we do, I just wanted to point out that this month we're doing a free giveaway on our Patreon. You can sign up for as low as $4 a month, which is $1 per week. That'll automatically enter you in the draw to win a free 3D printed Angron, which will be in your hands before the World Eaters Codex even hits the shelves, which will give you time to paint it, time to build it, and time to get it ready so that when you have that Codex in your hands, you can hit the tabletop on day one. So if you want more information on how you can enter this competition, head over to our Patreon. There's a whole ton of benefits that you get there as well. And yeah, let's get into the video.
Welcome to the Black God!
Alright, g'day guys. So we're going to talk through this debate that is raging online at the moment, thanks to Arcs of Omen. And that is, what would you prefer? Free war gear upgrades or points reductions on your unit? Or Armour of Contempt, because obviously this new update has come along and all the Marines have lost their Armour of Contempt, but they've gained a points increase, and people are debating whether or not that's a buff or a nerf. And I've got an interesting perspective on this, and I think this is something that sort of taps into a deeper principle of 40k as well, so I want to get into that as well. And basically, the way I conceptualize this is that you're taking the unit, you're reducing its durability, but you're increasing its offensive damage output. And that's essentially making the unit closer towards what we call a glass cannon. And that's, a unit that does massive amounts of damage, but generally dies in the process. So glass cannon units, in my opinion, are the strongest units in Warhammer 40k on principle. And the reason that this is because you can often use strategy and techniques to shore up your weaknesses in terms of durability. But it's very difficult to use strategy to overcome weaknesses in terms of damage output. So an example could be you've got a unit that's really vulnerable, it dies really easily, but it does massive amounts of damage. If you're able to put that in strategic reserves, well now your opponent can't interact with the unit and therefore its durability is effectively 100%. And then when it arrives from strat reserves, it's able to bring its damage to bear, do massive amounts of damage, and then it doesn't matter if it dies in the process because it's able to deliver that damage. Whereas a unit that has lower damage output but higher durability, there's not much you can really do to sort of increase that damage output, and your durability is already high enough. So you kind of, any points or any investment that you're making towards the durability of something is wasted because the alternative is putting it in strat reserves or putting it, out of line of sight or something like that for unlimited durability. So that's sort of the concept here. Another way of looking at it is, imagine you've got a character, right? Now you could spend points and command points and all of these sorts of things increasing the durability of that character. It might be points on storm shields or upgrades, even though these days they're all free, or it might be putting a relic on that character that makes him really, really hard to kill. Or you could put a relic on the character that makes him do massive amounts of damage and then rely on the Lookout Sir rule to protect your character from shooting attacks. And then use those same units that are giving you the Lookout Sir rule to screen your character off so he can't be charged. And in that situation, that character effectively has infinite durability because the opponent can't interact with it whatsoever, which means you're getting the best of both worlds. You're spending your points, you're spending your investment on increasing the damage output, and then you're using strategy and tactics to ensure that you have that high durability. So When it comes to losing Armour of Contempt, but gaining more damage, whether that be through gaining free war gear, or whether it be like Primaris units that don't gain free war gear, but they did get cheaper, which means you're able to bring more of them and then therefore do more damage, I think that's a huge win. So Chaos Space Marines, for example, like Legionaries, yeah, they lost Armour of Contempt, but they are so much more powerful now. They do so much more damage because they're bringing free melter guns, they're bringing free las cannons, they're getting power fists on the sergeant, they're getting heavy chain axes on every unit, you know. The damage output that they do has just gone way up. And as a result, the unit is more useful if you're able to wield it using strategies. Now, obviously, this is not always going to be the case, because sometimes in order to use strategies like the Lookout Sir, for example, so you want characters that are really soft and squishy but do massive amounts of damage, and inversely, you need whatever's screening the characters to lean more heavily into durability so that you can unlock the durability on the character by protecting them, right? So it's not always the case that offensive output is better than durability, not always the case, but I think it often is, especially on your units that are doing the work, you know, the units that you're planning to use to take your opponent off of objectives, the units you're planning to use to, you know, secure your secondary objectives by killing things, that sort of stuff. Almost always you're better off going with something that has low durability and high damage output. And there's a few instances where we can see this in action, like for example, Sisters of Battle were one of the most powerful armies for a while there. And they're a perfect example of this, where you're like, cool, you've got Zephyrim and Repentia, which are both relatively easy units to kill, but they were some of the most powerful units in the game because they would just come out of strat reserves, you couldn't interact with them. And then they would use their miracle dice to get an automatic charge, and then they would deal huge amounts of damage. You know, they would almost always kill something worth twice their points. And the reason that is because that thing that's worth twice their points has invested points in durability that is irrelevant if the Zephyrim are able to strike them before your opponent gets an opportunity to strike the Zephyrim, you know. Same with the Repentia. You'd put Repentia inside of a Rhino, and then you'd hide that Rhino out of line of sight. And it's like, cool, now you're using a lot of strategy to make sure that that Repentia unit, which is a glass cannon, is safe. And then in your turn, you're able to, you know, either pre-game move the Rhino, or just in your turn, disembark out of the Rhino, launch out, do your damage before anybody gets to have a look at those, you know, Zephyrim or Repentia. Other examples of this are Chaos Daemons, really, really good. Like, you look at Flamers and it's like, yeah, Flamers did massive amounts of damage. They were pretty easy to dispatch though, because when you charge into them in combat, they have, you know, very weak saves. They're not that tough. They've only got a couple wounds. Like, the Flamers of Tzeentch were pretty easy to kill, but they did massive amounts of damage. And then you would use their Warp Strike ability to make sure that they are always able to bring that damage forward. You know, so there's tons of examples of where you're using a strategy or a technique or a combo of some sort of units in order to provide a durability buff to a unit that's tooled towards doing damage. And as a result, losing Armour of Contempt, which is losing a little bit of durability, in order to gain free war gear, which is the ability to do a little bit more damage, is, in my opinion, a good thing. You know, it makes those units more powerful and stronger, even if you lost Armour of Contempt and the amount of offensive output you gained was disproportionate, right? So imagine if you became 20% less durable in order to do 10% more damage. Most people would think that's a bad deal, but I would still go for it. I'd take it, you know. If there was a unit out there that was toughness 1 with no armor save and a single wound, but it did, you know, 2d6 mortal wounds in the shooting phase, you know, or something ridiculous, right? People would be like, well, that unit's so easy to kill, it's not good. Whereas you'd be like, well, hang on a minute, it's amazing because I can just put it in strat reserves and come on from a table edge and do my mortal wounds, and it doesn't matter, you can't kill me because I'm not on the table, you know, or you'd hide it out of line of sight or whatever. Whereas if you think about the inverse, something that's really, really durable but does no damage, actually doesn't contribute to winning the game. You know, unless obviously you stack on top of it objective secured and you stack on top of it all of these other movement buffs and all these other factors. But if we're just comparing damage output and durability, damage output is almost always going to be a preferable thing to maximize on. So that's why I think that this change for CSM and Space Marines is a buff. And then obviously Space Marines, there's other things to consider, right? They got sticky objectives and they got really cheap, and things like the Primaris getting cheaper not only increases their damage output, but it means you get more bodies on the table, and therefore you get a durability buff as well. So obviously all of those things are factors when looking at Arcs of Omen as a whole picture. But I just wanted to take that one part of it, the durability versus, you know, damage output question, and sort of share my thoughts on that, because this is something that affects everything. It's not necessarily when an update comes along and changes things, but it's things like, you know, when deciding what warlord traits and what stratagems you should take, and, you know, all of this sort of stuff, what units you should take, what upgrades you should buy, all of these sorts of things. If you look at it through the lens of, can I use strategy to make myself durable? And if you can, well then use your points and your resources to make yourself do more damage. Whereas if you can't use that, if you can't use the strategy to make yourself more durable, well then you go for durability buffs as well, and you try to go for a bit of a balance. Or you might do something like, okay, cool, I'm going to take a unit of Chaos Space Marine Terminators, that's my real durable unit, and then I'm going to use the strategy with that durable unit to protect my characters, and therefore, with my characters, I'm not going to put any durability buffs on them, I'm going to put damage output buffs on them. And that way you go, cool, I'm going to have relics that, you know, do D3 damage in combat, or give me mortal wound output in combat, or I'm going to make these beat stick characters, because I know that they're going to be protected and they don't need the durability buff. So that's sort of a way that you can sort of approach this challenge. So just thought I'd weigh in on this debate. Nice short episode for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. And as always, like, subscribe, all that good shit. Join us over on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
Welcome to the Blood God.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.
Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not 1, not 2, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, people who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today.